These are Nebraska corn farmers. They work in acres, not hours, harvesting the energy and climate solutions the world needs. We are proud to stand with you.
The success of tomorrow's soy industry depends on the actions we take today. The future is here, and the time to move is now.
Market Journal Television for Agricultural Business Decisions is a presentation of the University of Nebraska-Lincoln's Institute of Agriculture and Natural Resources in partnership with the Nebraska Rural Radio Association. Promotional support provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine and partial funding provided by the Nebraska Soybean Board and the Nebraska Corn Board.
Well, hi everyone, I'm Bryce Uskett, and thank you very much for joining us today on Market Journal. This past week's weather has us all wishing that spring would be here, but will the snow return to the forecast in the near future? We'll get an answer to that question coming up a little bit with Eric Hunt. Plus, this past week, Nebraska Extension hosted the 40th Annual Women in Agriculture Conference. Our team was on hand, and we'll share with you some of the topics that were discussed at that big gathering in Kearney. But we're starting today's show off with another important gathering that recently took place. That is the Eastern Nebraska Soil Health Conference. On this week's Conservation Corner, let's take a closer look at some of the climate-smart ag practices for the Corn Belt that were discussed at this annual event. Market Journal's Bill Dodd reports.
That we're supporting the idea, and then
during this year's Eastern Nebraska Soil Health Conference, there were several topics of discussion. Keynote speaker Dr. Lisa Schulte-Moore was on hand from Iowa State University to discuss climate-smart practices for producers in the Corn Belt. During her presentation, she discussed the importance of utilizing and incentivizing continuous living cover on the landscape and developing new sources of fertilization.
Yeah, so three things. One, talking about different ways that we can integrate continuous living cover on the landscape, because we know that that's really important in terms of just keeping our soils in place, protecting that soil resource. The second thing is looking at alternative sources of fertilization. And so the practice that we're looking at in the research is using digestate from a process called anaerobic digestion as a fertilizer, and being able to replace some of the more fossil-based fertilizer with a biofertilizer. And then the third thing is new ways of paying for some of these practices. And so looking at renewable energy as a way to both integrate continuous living cover on the farm as well as providing that digestate fertilizer.
One project that came up during the conference was the Grass to Gas Initiative. This multi-institutional project assesses ways in which perennials and winter crops can be used more widely as feedstock for anaerobic digestion. The novelty of this project lies in leveraging a successful business model based on the digestion of manure to encompass new agricultural feedstocks, more diverse products, and increased value throughout the supply chain.
And the basic idea of it is, again, trying to figure out ways to incentivize continuous living cover on the landscape. So the two ways we're looking at it is by strategically integrating in prairie restoration, so our native cover to this region. Like, we're not going to turn the whole farm back to prairie, but are there places on the farm where it makes sense, especially from the standpoint of either protecting or keeping our soils in place or regenerating soil. And then also looking at, we talk a lot about cover crops, but can we actually grow that cover crop a little bit longer and turn it into a winter crop? Harvest that plant material, use a process called anaerobic digestion, and turn that plant material into a gas. In this case, we're looking at turning that into methane, which can be upgraded to a renewable natural gas. It's chemically the same as what you would use in your stove or in your boiler. It can be, right now the incentives are as a transportation fuel, but also can look at it for, say, home heating purposes and other more industrial purposes.
Another topic of discussion that stood out was the study and effective use of prairie strips. The basic idea is utilizing native plant species that are well adapted to the area, utilizing those plants to improve soils and water management in ecosystems that are currently dominated by corn and soybean rotations.
The idea is you don't have to turn it all back to prairie, but again, can we put a little bit back in and be really smart about where we put it and what are the benefits? The research my teams and I have done shows that if you put a little bit in, you have dramatic benefits. What we studied is, and this was in a more sloping landscape, but when you put 10% of the area into prairie strips, you keep 95% more of that soil in the area. We retain 77% of the phosphorus, 70% of the nitrogen. We double the birds using that area. We triple the pollinators using that area. We improve water infiltration. We help keep manure out of we keep it in the farm field, we keep it out of the water. We keep some of the pesticides in the crop environment and out of our water as well. The list of benefits just goes on. And so what we say is, like, these small changes, has big impacts, right? But I recognize that 10% is not small, which is what gets us to grass to gas. Like, if we want to have all these benefits, right, how do we pay for it?
A farmer's number one resource is their soil. By adopting certain practices, producers can help ensure that the soil they are utilizing today will remain in good condition for future generations. Reporting for Market Journal, I'm Bill Dodd.
All right, thanks for that information, Bill. We do appreciate it. Now, if you'd like some more insights on this topic, we've added a direct link to her ISU bio page. Along with this story, find that over on the Market Journal homepage. Let's turn our attention now over to the 40th Annual Women in Agriculture Conference I share with you recently took place. This event covered a wide range of topics, including one that really hit home for many of those in the audience. That was called Marketing Mind Games. Extension Educator Jessica Groskopf led this workshop on how to maximize your marketing plan and avoid some of the common pitfalls out there. Market Journal's Mike Straub has more on the strategies shared at this conference.
One of the biggest obstacles to the marketing mind game is the fear that we are making the wrong marketing decisions. Marketing decisions should not always be based on getting the highest price, and there are good reasons to sell grain below the highest price.
Sometimes farmers get caught in what I call the grain marketing mind game, which is kind of those emotional sales and emotional holds, right? We're not really sure if it's the right time or whether or not we should take action in the market. And by having a written marketing plan that helps us take action and really process through what we want to accomplish as a farmer, and that's to survive. And to be able to survive, we've got to sell grain.
To avoid information fatigue, find 2 or 3 trusted information sources. By filtering your information intake, you are more likely to retain the information you are receiving and be more effective at making marketing decisions.
Well, we can't go back and change it, right? Once we have sold that grain, we were making the best decision we could with the information that we had. If the market continues to go up, we should celebrate that the market's going up. But if the market goes down, we know that we at least have some sales at some higher prices. It's very easy to get overloaded on information as a farmer. I get text messages 3 times a day on my phone from my local cooperative about how much grain is selling for. We do have a lot of market commentators. We have a lot of folks who are trying to predict where the market's headed, and that can cause more confusion and really some more emotions around grain marketing. So I encourage folks to have 1 or 2 sources of trusted information that they follow and that they work with to help develop that marketing plan, but then really be realistic about what the price and the expectation for prices is for this year.
Find a price barometer that you can gauge prices against. This can be your cost of production, cash flow price, or the predicted cash price range from the USDA. This allows you to look at prices more objectively to determine if you are making a sound marketing decision.
It depends on what that source of information is. So we know that there are specific sources of information that we rely on, like the USDA WASDE report, and it's not whether reports like that are right or wrong, it's how are you going to react to them.
One of the easiest ways to defeat the marketing mind game is to write a grain marketing plan. Once you have your plan written, share it with someone like your spouse or banker who will help you stick to your marketing goals.
As we look at markets, we have to think about the fact that there is a possibility or a range of possibilities for prices to fall within a year. So a couple of sources of information we like to look at to set that realistic expectation is looking at the USDA WASDE reports. It's also looking at what potentially our bank cash flowed us at the beginning of the year, and then seeing what the market is truly offering us today. And each individual farmer is going to look at those prices and might have a different perspective. But the biggest difference that we see in that realistic price expectation is your individual cost of production and estimated cost of production. And we have to continually be looking at that number as it evolves throughout the year and not just at one point. My biggest piece of advice is not only to have a price in mind, but to actually sit down and write a physical grain marketing plan that includes your price targets, date targets, and also has ideas of what types of contracts that you are going to use this year, breaking the quantity you expect to produce or the quantity you have in the bin down into smaller units so that you're selling throughout these peak season prices through planting and into late July, early August.
Interesting story there, Mike. If you'd like to learn more about this topic, Jessica has some written details online you can find by visiting cropwatch.unl.edu. Simply head over there and search for Marketing Mind Games. Well, speaking of marketing mind games, let's shift our focus over to the livestock markets. As joining the broadcast this week is University of Nebraska-Lincoln's livestock marketing and risk management specialist, Elliott Dennis. Here's our conversation from Wednesday morning. Okay, let's begin our conversation today talking about the feeder cattle market regaining a lot of the ground that they lost over the past month or so. Do you see momentum continuing?
Yeah, when we look at January kind of total sales and receipts that went through the sale barn, it was incredible. A lot of those cattle are being pulled forward. Feedlots eager to place cattle. I think there's profits to be made right now given kind of the beef complex that's out there. And so, yeah, the markets have definitely been beneficial. I think where we might see some slowdown in the future is that, as we've noticed, the live cattle prices have started to come down, lost about $10 over the last couple of weeks. And so I think that's going to put some pressure. Most of those break-evens are going to be around for producers around the 180 to 190 mark. So there's still some profits there, but just not as much as there were. And so as that kind of price dynamic between feeder and feds kind of changes, we'll kind of determine how quickly we're going to pull cattle forward, not if cattle are going to be placed in the feed yard.
Why do you think live cattle have kind of lagged behind when it comes to the rebound that we saw in feeder cattle?
I think there's just a lot of uncertainty in the market right now when we think about macro levels. I mean, think about all the kind of the policy changes that are happening. I think there's just kind of an overall concern about what's going to happen in the economy as people start to kind of think about where they're going to allocate income. I think that's kind of the overarching kind of theme there when we talk about just kind of the live cattle complex and why there may be some kind of bearish kind of where the prices should actually go and consumers' ability to spend on beef.
Well, pretty good demand out there when it comes to feeder cattle, as you noted, yeah. Elliott, and that was reflected in the latest cattle on feed reports. What caught your attention as you reviewed that data?
Yeah, the greatest thing that I saw was really no surprise there. I mean, we saw like what happened in the futures market right after the report hit. Really no change. It started trading sideways, really in line with the expectation. When we think about kind of moving forward of kind of where that complex is going to be at, we're thinking about, how, not if cattle are going to be on feed, it's how long they're going to be on feed. And that's really reflective in total harvest weights that we're seeing last year with all-time high of where we're at with cattle weights. This year, we've continued to even be higher than last year. And so cattle are staying on feed longer, which means there's going to be higher quality product out there, which is going to help on the export market. But really, when we talk about fat deposit, tallow prices have been high, which have kind of helped support. But as long as there's not huge discounts, that continue to be on the packing plant for yield grade 4s and 5s, we'll continue to raise them to be pretty fat.
You brought up demand a few minutes ago, but when it comes to demand, oftentimes we look at that through the price of box beef, which has been climbing higher over the past few weeks here. What do you attribute that to? Yeah,
some of it just kind of seasonality, kind of where we're at. When we think about kind of what's kind of carrying it, it's really kind of a lot of those middle meats. When we think about kind of what's kind of lagged behind, we think about this high-end prices. So think of like your tenderloin, which tends to be kind of a restaurant-based product. We're not seeing strong restaurant demand right now. And so that's why some of that price has come down. But I think, it's really in line with kind of where we're at seasonally. But looking at kind of where we're at, generally there's price appreciation as we go in and really start to hit the grilling months come May and June.
Always amazes me when we talk about the grilling months. So we have to wait till May before people say we're in full swing because you get the weather we've had over the past week. And I see some of my friends are pulling out their grills this time of year. So
that's right.
I say it starts right now. Elliott, let's talk about some of the news happening in the world. New world screwworm got a second case confirmed I saw in Mexico. Is that going to impact imports of Mexican cattle or not so much this time?
So we've already kind of put in the protocols for import of Mexican cattle. 2 ports. Pretty strict protocol that USDA APHIS has kind of put in. I guess the real issue is going to be more kind of this feral cattle that kind of come back and forth across the U.S.-Mexican line. which I think is the larger biosecurity concern when we talk about New World screwworm. I think USDA APHIS is doing a good job trying to control those cattle coming in. It's a concern, I think, when we think about just the ability for those flies to kind of continue up as the summer months heat up. And USDA is trying to have protocols with sterile male flies out there. But I'm more concerned about just kind of the feral cattle that will come across the U.S. and the ability for us to even detect this. If we think about when this came out in the 60s and 70s, a lot of those people that were able to detect and kind of their whole job was to go out there and detect for this fly and eradicate it, are not working in the industry or are not active in the industry. So I think that will be the largest impact, is how do we teach a new generation how to control this if it does come into the United States.
Well, that's been a discussion point over the past couple of months, but also in the background continues to be highly pathogenic avian influenza, not just impacting birds, but also saw that carry over into dairy cattle. A lot of discussion whether it impact beef cattle. Hasn't really been the case based on my assessment. I guess you can correct that. But do you worry about that impacting? Which one, I guess, do you worry about more impacting the beef sector?
Well, I would say when we think about eggs, that's one that's getting a lot of the attention, but I think the potential impact for the beef cattle is definitely on the dairy cattle, and specifically the transmission from human or from animals to people who are around livestock. That whole transmission has yet to be kind of fully fleshed out, but I think that's the greatest impact. We obviously talk about eggs. CDC kind of reports total human cases that have been involved with kind of highly pathogenic diseases or influenza. When we think about kind of the egg kind of sector, egg prices are higher, right? And it takes us about 6 months from the time we do a depopulation to the actual time those productivity kind of comes back online. Interesting enough, prices are high enough that we're starting to see kind of new market dynamics out there. But I think really when we think about the foreseeable future of where egg prices are, they are going to be elevated. And the sticker on that is there's no real good substitute for what eggs are. Higher beef prices, we tend to substitute into other meat products, eggs. What's a good substitute for an egg in a baking recipe? There's really not one.
Thanks to Elliott for joining us. Now, I want to let you know that coming up next week, we'll be coming to you from the annual Commodity Classic event, which this year will take place in Denver, Colorado. I want to invite you to join us as we'll have a special market segment right here on Market Journal. Water management and irrigation are, of course, critical to Nebraska's agriculture industry, and it's a topic that we talk a lot about. Farmers, natural resources districts, USDA, NRCS, you name it, everyone seems to be focused on water. But what is the next generation? Think about it. How do young farmers feel about the future of water conservation, usage, and policy? Well, last fall at Husker Harvest Days, several young producers were put on the hot seat to answer some of these tough questions. If you're curious about their take, you can read all about it in the February issue of the Nebraska Farmer. It is now time to shift our focus over to the weather with Nebraska Extension and Market Journal Chief Meteorologist Eric Hunt. Eric, we got that warm weather you teased us about last week, but I'm afraid we're not quite through the winter just yet. How are things shaping up?
Well, thanks, Bryce. Saturday is the first official day of meteorological spring, but we're not quite done with winter weather for some of us this week, or not a little bit. Starting off the week, though, Monday looks pretty warm across the state. Temperatures mostly in the 60s for highs. So again, we're going to have some ice jam pressure along the Platte, Elkhorn, and Loup River. So low-lying areas near there will still have some flooding potential the early portion of this next week. As we head into Tuesday, Monday night into Tuesday, we'll be watching this trough move into the central plains and into the upper Midwest. That should allow for a prolonged period of rising motion across this region and a pretty good chance for moisture across the central plains into the Corn Belt, and probably some chances of snow for portions of western Nebraska as well. WPC shows the best moisture being to our east, but most of Nebraska is likely to pick up at least some precipitation from this, and I do think there will be chances for a lot of eastern Nebraska pick up a half to maybe as much as an inch of rain out of this. The European ensemble shows the highest probability of getting a half inches across eastern Nebraska, but they do show some potential for picking up a half inch of moisture pretty much out toward the Wyoming border. Now again, I do think most of eastern Nebraska is likely to be all rain from this. Central Nebraska probably mostly rain, but there could be some snow mixed in, even as far east as Lincoln later on Tuesday. Certainly though in western Nebraska, this is a potential to be an all snow event. I would maybe pay a little bit closer attention to the forecast as you get into Monday, as there may be a potential for some areas in here to have some heavier bands of snow. Right now, it's kind of hard to pick out where exactly that may be, but there may be places that pick up 3 to 6 inches of snow and other places may not pick up much of anything. Kind of the way things go in March. As we get to late in the week, we are looking at another shortwave trough moving into the southern plains. This one looks to be to our south. If this ends up being a little bit further north, certainly the southern portion of the state may pick up a little bit more precipitation on Thursday night into Friday. By the end of the week, though, we are looking at ridging building back into the north central United States. That should keep us relatively warm. Certainly by Saturday, I think most of us should be back in the mid-50s to mid-60s, so pretty nice end of the week. We are expecting warm temperatures to stay around through next weekend and probably early into the week after next. So that's probably good news for those of you who are wanting soils to thaw a little bit more. No real signal for precipitation across this region during the period from the 8th to the 12th of March. Certainly looking wetter toward the west. And I think that's because we are starting to enter into a more active pattern finally. And I think this will start these troughs will bring us more chances of precipitation as we head toward the middle of March. Again, it's too early to say exactly what's going to be coming out of this in terms of precipitation type. Right now, the biggest cold looks to stay toward north and west, but I think we will certainly have to watch to see if we get enough cold air in here to produce some additional snowfall in the middle of March. In terms of temperatures this week, though, we had some very, very impressive record swings in temperature. So we had 6 sites on the Nebraska Mesa that had a 100-degree temperature swing between last Thursday morning and this last Tuesday afternoon. A lot of other sites around the state set record temperature swings in the course of a 4-day period. Soil moisture right now across the state is pretty lacking, as it is across this entire region. Again, we are dealing with a lot of drought across a lot of the Corn Belt, northern high plains, starting to see some dryness across the southern high plains as well. Soil temperatures across the state are starting to come up. We still have a little bit of frost in the ground. We are starting to see soil temperatures routinely stay a little bit above freezing. And here's our temperature and precipitation roundup for the week ending February 22nd, 2025. Back to you, Bryce.
Thanks for that update. We'll keep an eye on that forecast as the week progresses. Finally today, we're going to head to a different ag conference now. Earlier this week, Bayer hosted an agronomy event, which took place in Lincoln. Their kickoff one did, focusing on how producers can grow smarter in 2025. During that session, we had a chance to catch up with a Bayer agronomist to reflect on the biggest challenges that the team at Bayer saw in 2024 and preview some of the hurdles that he sees as we head into the upcoming growing season. So looking back on 2024, one of the key challenges that I heard producers talk about was southern rust. Imagine the same is for you. What's your assessment of that situation?
Absolutely, Bryce. In 2024, southern rust was the name of the game when it came to corn disease management. Here's the fortunate thing for 2025. Southern rust is a tropical disease, can't overwinter in Nebraska. The last time we saw southern rust severity at that magnitude was 2006. So it had been almost 18 years in terms of magnitude of southern rust. That being said, there are a lot of lessons we can take from managing southern rust, particularly around fungicides, and translate that to tar spot in 2025. They're both polycyclic diseases, meaning multiple generations a year. But the difference with tar spot is we know it can overwinter. It was detected in late 2021, and it's been building up inoculum every single year. That's what we're looking for in terms of management for 2025.
Okay, what are some of those lessons that we can apply ahead to this next growing season?
Absolutely. Number one lesson is with fungicides, it's always better to lead versus lag. It's really hard to catch up with these aggressive diseases that can turn around a generation every 2 or 3 weeks like tar spot. With that, in terms of timing, particularly for corn fungicide, the most consistent ROI for a grower is at tassel. We're protecting the upper canopy down to the ear leaf. That's what's really helping fill that corn ear late in the season. We want to protect that tissue. A lot of our fungicide active ingredients act as a protectant. So it prevents the spore from the fungus from ever entering the plant, stopping infection to begin with. Plants are a bit different than us. They can't necessarily heal, they seal. So once the damage is done, it's done. We really want to be on the leading side of that as opposed to trying to play catch up.
Okay, and remind me on tar spot, it can overwinter, right? So if producers had that last year, likely they're going to see that again this year if conditions are right?
Likely to see it this year. The big driver for tar spot is moisture. It's not only is there rainfall, but also what we're doing in terms of the pivot. Introducing moisture in that canopy every single time it goes around.
Back on fungicide, you talked about the ROI, and there's always a conversation when, as you mentioned, tassels are getting near of, is it going to pay here in this growing season? What kind of research can you share with us that you and the team at Bayer has done over the years to show some of that ROI on Nebraska acres?
One example is a trial we had at Battle Creek this past year, replicated large-scale trial, about 15 by 300 foot plots, replicated 3 times each. We took 3 of our fungicide products. We had a non-treated control. We looked at V5 applications, so when there are 5 leaves out on the plant, we looked at those V5 applications with tassel applications as well, and then we looked at tassel applications alone. Relative to the non-treated control, we averaged about a bushel on those V5 applications. Anything that included a tassel application, we averaged a gain of 31 bushels per acre. That tends to be a bit on the high side of what we see in an average year, but in 24 we did have higher disease pressure with southern rust and tar spot that was there as well.
I think most growers and our viewers today would gladly take that.
Absolutely.
Each and every year. All right, let's go from corn to soybeans now. White mold was the story last year.
Certainly. White mold is always a crapshoot to a certain degree. Really depends how the weather tees up at that flowering stage. 2023 was a tremendous white mold year. We saw it further south in Nebraska than we had seen it before. A lot of that goes back to the moisture, the overcast conditions that we had in late June, early July that favored the pathogen. One of the tricky parts I mentioned, it's hard to catch up with these diseases. We're actually trying to disrupt the infection during flowering. By the time we see that white fuzz, it's too late. We aren't catching up at that point. The damage is largely done. So if conditions are moist, cool, overcast as we get into late June, early July, that's when growers may be wanting to think about a fungicide application. You won't see the pathogen yet, but it's there and we need to disrupt that infection process.
Any particular fungicides you guys have looked for soybeans and white mold that are working better than others at this point?
Delaro completed its Bear's Lead offering for white mold in Nebraska. The reason being is it has two effective modes of action. It has a triazole and an SDHI that are specifically targeting white mold.
Okay. Well, based on everything you observed over the last couple of years, what else is on your mind and you're sharing with growers here ahead of this growing season?
We touched on a lot of the main points, Bryce. I always encourage growers to reach out to us, particularly what issues they're facing on their field. We're always looking for research opportunities to continue to deliver unique insights to the Nebraska marketplace.
Always helpful when you get that grower collaboration and be able to do some of these trials directly on their fields. Brett, really appreciate you joining us and sharing some of the insights today.
Thank you, Bryce.
You're sensing a little bit of a theme of this week's broadcast of many of the ag conferences taking place recently that we had the chance to feature here on Market Journal. Good to visit with Brett and get his take on 2025 and some of the challenges we might be facing in the new growing season. Well, that is going to do it for this week's show. If you did miss one of our stories, I want to invite you to follow the Market Journal team on YouTube and, of course, on social media where you can join in on the conversation. Next week, we'll be bringing you the latest and greatest from this year's Commodity Classic event happening in Denver, Colorado. Hope you'll join us for that broadcast. But until then, I'm Bryce Uskett, wishing you a safe and productive week.
Join Market Journal online at marketjournal.unl.edu. You can also follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. Promotional support is provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine. Market Journal is produced by the University of Nebraska-Lincoln's Institute of Agriculture and Natural Resources.